Hello everyone and welcome to Study IQ English. I am Joycey Joy. In this video, we will be discussing about the difference between current account deficit and trade deficit. Most often, many of you get confused whether both these terms are the same or not. Current account deficit and trade deficit. But both are not the same terms and you cannot use it interchangeably. Both are different terms. We will be discussing about this in detail in this video. Let's get started. First, coming to current account deficit. But before coming to current account deficit, you should know one thing, what is a balance of payment. So first, coming to the basics of current account deficit, that is balance of payment or the BOP. You must have heard about this term BOP many times in the news, especially in relation to 1991 reforms. It was the BOP crisis in India that initiated the process of LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization in India. So you must have heard this term BOP or balance of payment coming up in the news. So basically, what is a balance of payment? Balance of payment is actually an account, or it is actually a statement of account of the transactions of one country with the rest of the world. Why do we keep accounts? Accounts are basically statements that provides the list of transactions of any company or any businesses. Same way, balance of payment is also an account, but it is an account kept by the government of a country in order to show the transactions of the country or the economic transactions of the country with the rest of the world. So we can say balance of payment is an account of transactions of a country with the rest of the world. It's a systematic account of transactions of a country with the rest of the world. Now the question is whether this account contains only the transactions done by the government or does it contain the transactions done by the private sector as well. So answer is all the transactions of a country with the rest of the world is accounted here. That is the transactions done by the government as well as by the private sector. So we can say that balance of payment is an account mentioning all the transactions, government and private sector. And it is a double entry bookkeeping. Why it is called a double entry bookkeeping? It is double entry because all the incoming and outgoing transactions are recorded here. It is not just the outgoing transactions but also the incoming transactions. Let us take for example, export is an outgoing transaction whereas import is an incoming transaction. So all of this are kept here. It's a double entry bookkeeping and it contains the transactions made by the government as well as by the private sector. Now you know that balance of payment is an accounts. Now, balance of payment has two major types of accounts, or there are two major components in a balance of payment. One is current account. Second one is capital account. So there are two components in a balance of payment, current account and capital account. Now, within current account, there are three things or four things: export, import, then trade balance and invisibles. Okay, capital account I am not discussing now. Definitely I will be discussing about capital account in detail. So in the current account there are four components. One is export, another one is import, another one is trade balance and another one is invisibles. Now, if you see this components of current account, then you will understand that trade balance or balance of trade is a component of current account. It is not the current account itself. I was explaining all this to make you understand that trade balance or balance of trade and current account balance are not the same. Trade balance is only the difference between exports and imports. And trade balance is only one component of current account. It is not the current account in itself. Apart from trade balance, there is one more component in current account, that is invisibles. Invisibles can be services, transfer payments or also income from abroad. So that is what I wanted to tell you as an introduction. Now coming on to current account deficit. Now, current account measures the flow of goods, services and investments into and out of the country. It represents a foreign country's foreign transactions like the capital account. It is a component of current country's balance of payment. We have already seen balance of payment is a systematic record of all the economic transactions that a country makes with the rest of the world. And balance of payment can be of two types, or it is divided into two accounts. One is current account, another one is capital account. So current account is a component of, see, it said that current account is a component of balance of payment. Why? Because in balance of payment there are two components, current account and the capital account. Now, there is a deficit in current account if the value of the goods and services imported exceeds the value of those exported. Now, the difference is that in case of a current account, we have seen the components. Coming back to the components, export, import, trade balance. See, basically trade balance is the difference between export and import. Now, apart from export and import and trade balance, one more item is there, that is invisibles. And we have seen that it includes services, income and transfer payments. Now, current account is actually the difference in this components. So, how do you find the current account balance? Current account balance is trade balance plus net invisibles. Trade balance plus net invisibles will give you current account balance. So, if current account is in deficit, that is if there is an unfavorable balance in current account, it means that the value of goods and services imported exceeds the value of that is exported. A nation's current account maintains a record of countries' transactions with other nations that includes net income, including interest and dividends, transfers like foreign aid. Now, these are the components of a current account. Trade of goods. Trade of goods contains exports and imports. Exports and imports. These are the components of trade of goods. Second is services. Then net earnings on overseas investments and net transfer of payments over a period of time. That is like for example remittances. These are the components of a current account. And this is the formula to find out the current account balance. Current account balance is trade balance plus net invisibles. So, I hope you get the connection. If trade balance is given, how to find the current account balance? You have to add the net invisibles to trade balance to get the current account balance. Now, next is trade deficit. Trade deficit. Here, it's a deficit. Deficit means that it is less. Deficit is less. So, it's just opposite of surplus. Trade deficit occurs when the cost of a country's imports exceeds the cost of exports. So, when the cost of imports exceeds the cost of exports. And we have already seen how do you find the trade balance of a country. It is the difference between exports and imports. Now, if the exports are higher than imports, then it is a favorable trade balance which is called a trade surplus. So, if exports are higher than imports, it is called a surplus. And trade deficit is when the imports of a country are higher than the exports of a country. So, this is a situation of trade deficit. Trade deficit is when imports are higher than exports. The term trade deficit refers to amount of international trade that takes place between countries throughout the world. So, the term trade deficit is definitely a less, or it is something that's not full, or the opposite of surplus. So, it refers to the amount of international trade that takes place between countries throughout the world. When an international transaction account has a negative balance, it is said to be a trade deficit. These foreign accounts, such as balance of payment, track all monetary transactions between residents and non-residents. Now, let's see what is the difference between current account deficit and trade deficit in a comparison which will be more easy for you to understand. First, we are coming to the meaning of current account deficit and trade deficit. Current account deficit, all transactions relating to countries' goods and services. See, here services are also included, along with transfer payments, comprise of the current account deficit. So, what are the components of current account deficit? Trade of goods plus services plus transfer payments. At the time when current account receipts are less than payment, then at this point it is considered as current account deficit. So current account deficit is when the current account receipts are less than the payments. Receipts are less than the payment, it is considered as a current account deficit. Now, coming to trade deficit, the difference between all visible, so visible transactions, that is exports and imports. So exports and imports, that is merchandise good, trade of merchandise good. Trade of merchandise good. The difference between all visible and all exports and imports is called a trade deficit. So that is only the visibles are calculated or accounted for in a trade deficit, that is exports and imports. At a point when the imports surpass the exports, it is known as trade deficit. So trade deficit is when the imports are higher than exports. So only two components are taken to find out trade deficit, that is only exports and imports, whereas in case of a current account deficit, not just the import and export of goods but also services and transfer payments are accounted for. Now let's see the formula which will give you even better idea regarding this. Current account deficit equals to autonomous current receipts are less than autonomous current payments. Trade deficit is when the imports of a country are higher than the exports of a country. And it is inclusive of all visible goods and services and unilateral transfers. So, inclusive of means contains or components. In case of a current account deficit, it contains all visible goods. Visible goods, then services and unilateral transfer, that is transfer payments. Now, it includes only visible goods, that is merchandise goods are the only components, that is export and import are the only two factors that makes up for the trade balance. If trade balance is unfavorable, that is if exports are less than imports, then it is a trade deficit. So, this is the difference between trade deficit and current account deficit. I hope you won't confuse between both of this again. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all the very best.